The film opens with a playful sparring session between Secret Service agent Mike Banning and President Benjamin Asher. At first glance, it looks like simple training, but the way they joke and move around each other makes it obvious their bond goes far beyond duty. Mike is not just another agent assigned to protect the president. He has become someone the first family trusts on a personal level. At Camp David, the president's wife, Margaret, and their young son Connor are getting ready for a charity event. Mike's closeness with them is clear in the small moments. He casually helps Margaret choose the right earrings for the evening, and later, he gives Connor a few friendly words about what it really means to be a good agent. It feels less like a formal security detail and more like a family preparing for a night out with someone they genuinely depend on. But as they prepare to leave for the fundraiser, the weather begins turning dangerous. Snow falls heavily, covering the road and making the drive increasingly risky. President Asher and Margaret ride together in the main limousine, while Connor sits with Mike in one of the SUVs following behind them. Then, without warning, everything falls apart. A large tree branch crashes into the lead vehicle, triggering a violent chain reaction across the motorcade. Cars slam and skid across the frozen bridge. One Secret Service SUV breaks through the railing and drops straight into the icy water below. But the most terrifying sight comes moments later, when the president's limousine is left hanging halfway over the edge of the bridge, rocking dangerously as it threatens to fall. Mike and the other agents immediately rush into action. They try to stabilize the vehicle by putting weight on the side still resting on the bridge, fighting against gravity and time at once. Inside the limo, both President Asher and Margaret are trapped. The agents work desperately to get them out before the vehicle gives way completely. Mike manages to reach the president first and pulls him free. But Margaret's door is jammed, and the limo keeps sliding farther over the edge. Mike tries everything he can, but the situation becomes impossible. In the end, he is forced to save the president, while Margaret remains trapped inside. Seconds later, the limo slips from the bridge and crashes into the freezing water, taking her with it. Connor runs toward the scene, screaming in horror as he realizes his mother is gone. Mike stands there devastated, knowing he survived the night but failed to save someone who trusted him. 18 months later, that tragedy still follows him everywhere. Mike is no longer the same man. The guilt has settled deep inside him, and even at home, he seems distant and distracted. His wife Lee tries to reconnect with him, gently suggesting that they should spend more time together. Mike knows she is right, and out of guilt more than ease, he promises they will have a movie night once he gets back from work. His current job at the U.S. Treasury feels nothing like his old life in the Secret Service. He sits behind a desk now, far from the president's side, but the memories of that night at Camp David still refuse to leave him alone. Later, Mike meets with Secret Service Director Lynn Jacobs. She understands exactly what has been eating away at him. Mike still blames himself for Margaret's death, but Jacobs reminds him that he made the only choice available in that moment. He saved the president, and as painful as it was, he did his job. Even President Asher does not hate him for what happened. The problem is simpler and sadder than that. Seeing Mike only brings back the memory of losing Margaret, and Asher cannot face that every day. Meanwhile, President Asher spends time with Connor, discussing their planned visit to Camp David. Connor is not exactly excited about the trip and would much rather go somewhere like the beach. Trying to brighten the moment, Asher suggests they go get ice cream together. But before they can enjoy the idea, presidential duty interrupts. Asher is called away for an urgent meeting. The meeting concerns a serious diplomatic issue involving the South Korean Prime Minister and growing threats from North Korea. At the White House, important officials gather for the discussion, including Secretary of Defense Ruth McMillan, Speaker of the House Alan Trumbull, and Vice President Charles Rodriguez. Soon after, South Korean Prime Minister Lee arrives with his security chief, Kang Yeon-sak. The situation between North and South Korea is tense, and the meeting is meant to address the rising danger before it spirals further out of control. But while the leaders are focused on diplomacy inside the White House, a much bigger threat is already moving in nearby. Over North Virginia, a massive C-130 gunship is detected flying through restricted airspace. 2 American fighter jets intercept it, ordering the aircraft to land immediately or face force. For a brief moment, it seems like standard military protocol might contain the situation. Then the gunship reveals its true intention. Instead of complying, it opens fire with heavy machine guns and destroys both American jets in midair. The shocking attack is quickly reported to President Asher. Realizing this is not just a security violation but a full-scale assault, he ends the meeting at once. Against normal procedure, Asher chooses to protect his foreign guests first. He orders Prime Minister Lei and his team to be taken with him to the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, known as the PEOC. It is the safest place beneath the White House, designed for moments exactly like this. Outside, the American military reacts as fast as possible. Fighter jets are scrambled. Soldiers take defensive positions. Surface-to-air missile systems prepare to engage the incoming aircraft. Washington is suddenly on a war footing. At the Treasury, Mike is sitting at his desk, seemingly far removed from the crisis. But then he notices the chaos unfolding outside. His instincts kick in immediately. The gunship begins tearing through the streets from above, spraying bullets into the city. Civilians scatter in panic as cars explode, bodies fall, and the Capitol turns into a battlefield within minutes. Mike looks out at the destruction and cannot simply stay where he is. Whatever his title says now, the agent inside him is still alive. He runs straight toward the danger. Anti-aircraft turrets fire missiles at the gunship, but the aircraft uses its countermeasures to deflect the attack. While the country's most powerful officials take shelter inside the PEOC, Mike charges through the streets, moving directly into the chaos as the assault on Washington grows more horrifying by the second. Mike rushes through the chaos, shouting for civilians to get down and pushing terrified people toward any place that might offer protection. Around him, Washington has turned into pure panic, but he keeps moving, trying to save as many lives as he can. Then the gunship changes direction and aims directly at the White House. In seconds, it opens fire on the building, tearing across the rooftop and wiping out the guards stationed there. The attack is overwhelming, and for a moment it looks like nothing can stop the aircraft. But just as the destruction reaches its peak, an American fighter jet cuts through the sky and launches a missile. This time, the strike lands perfectly. The gunship bursts into flames, loses control, and crashes into the Washington Monument. The impact is catastrophic. The aircraft smashes into the historic structure before slamming down onto the ground, and the force causes the upper section of the monument to collapse. Pieces of stone rain down below, crushing several tourists who had been caught in the wrong place at the worst possible moment. Deep beneath the White House, inside the secure bunker, President Asher is not thinking about himself first. His immediate concern is Connor. With everything collapsing above them, he urgently tells the people around him to make sure his son is protected and brought to safety. Outside, Mike watches the burning wreckage and the scattered destruction left behind. For a brief second, there is almost a pause, as if the city itself is trying to understand what just happened. Then explosions rip through the White House perimeter. Mike instantly spots attackers placing explosives along the fences. They are not just causing chaos, they are creating an opening. Mike raises his weapon and takes one of them down, but another bomber manages to complete his task. The blast tears through the defenses, and the real ground assault begins. A new wave of Korean insurgents moves in, throwing smoke grenades to cover their advance. Thick clouds roll across the lawn, hiding their movements as they launch RPGs toward the White House gates. The explosions rip through the barriers, and within moments, a fierce gunfight erupts between the attackers and the Secret Service. The battle is brutal. Agents and terrorists go down on both sides as bullets cut across the grounds. Mike throws himself into the fight without hesitation, using his training and instincts to hold the line as long as possible. But the situation only gets worse when two large trucks begin moving toward the White House. Meanwhile, inside the Pentagon crisis room, Director Jacobs gathers with Ray Monroe, General Clegg, and other senior officials. They are quickly briefed on the nightmare unfolding in real time. The White House is under direct attack, the president is trapped underground, and the enemy is moving faster than anyone expected. Back at the White House, the Secret Service is being overwhelmed. The attackers have superior firepower, better positioning, and a clearly planned strategy. More officers fall as the assault continues, but Mike's accuracy gives the defenders a fighting chance. He takes out multiple attackers, buying precious seconds while military reinforcements race toward the scene. But the most dangerous betrayal is happening where no one expects it. Inside the bunker, gunfire suddenly erupts. Kang Yonsak, along with his men and an unexpected traitor, former Secret Service agent Dave Forbes, turns on the security team. In seconds, the agents inside the PEOC are executed. The one place meant to protect the president has now become a trap. President Asher, Secretary McMillan, Vice President Rodriguez, and the others are forced to raise their hands as Kang's men surround them. They are now hostages inside the safest room in the country. Outside, Mike and the remaining defenders try to regroup, but the approaching trucks make everything even worse. One truck rolls into position, and its rear doors swing open to reveal a massive mounted machine gun. The weapon unleashes a devastating stream of bullets, cutting down soldiers and agents trying to defend the entrance. Then an RPG hits the main doors of the White House. The blast tears open the front entrance, and Mike watches in horror as more of his fellow agents are killed in front of him. With the outer defenses broken, he pushes forward and gets inside the White House, using the building itself as cover while the attack continues around him. The second truck now delivers its purpose. Its cargo doors open, revealing crates loaded with weapons and supplies. The terrorists move quickly, arming themselves even further and strengthening their position inside the White House. This was never a random attack. Every step was planned. Their technical specialist, Lim, begins locking down the building from the inside. He jams outside communication and disables external access to the White House security systems, cutting the defenders off from the control they need to respond. Still, the agents inside refuse to surrender. Agent Roma and his team launch a desperate counterattack, trying to stop the terrorists who have reached the control room. Gunfire echoes through the halls as they fight room by room, but the attackers keep advancing. Realizing the situation has become hopeless, Roma sends out one final message: Olympus has fallen. It is the code no one wanted to hear. The White House has been lost. Moments later, Roma is killed, and the terrorists fully seize control. Outside, reinforcements finally gather around the building. Soldiers surround the White House, studying every angle, trying to understand how to retake one of the most protected places in the world without getting the president killed in the process. At the Pentagon Command Center, the officials are hit with another shock. Kang establishes a live video feed from inside the bunker. Everyone watching is forced to witness the horrifying execution of Prime Minister Lee. Kang's message is cold and direct. If America does not stand down, more people will die. When the video call ends, the threat becomes even more personal. President Asher refuses to cooperate with Forbes, refusing to submit to the traitor's pressure. Kang responds by killing another innocent person, making it brutally clear that he has no hesitation about using murder to force obedience. Inside the White House, Mike moves through the ruined corridors carefully. Bodies lie across the floor, smoke hangs in the air, and every hallway could be hiding another attacker. Eventually, he finds Agent Roma lying on the ground. Seeing him only hardens Mike's resolve. He continues toward the control room. Moving silently, Mike slips in and takes out one of the guards before the man can react. While checking the body, he finds something disturbing in the guard's pocket, a photograph of Connor. That confirms Mike's worst fear. The terrorists are not only after the president, they are hunting his son too. Using the control room computers, Mike works quickly and manages to shut the terrorists out of the system. It is a small victory, but an important one. Still, the larger crisis is far from over. Inside the bunker, Kang remains calm and completely in control. He demands access to classified archived files from President Asher. Then he begins explaining his hatred toward America, blaming the United States for interfering in the Korean conflict and worsening the suffering of his people. Speaking in Korean, Kang orders his men to find Connor. Asher understands enough to realize what is happening, but trapped at gunpoint, he is powerless to stop it. At the Pentagon, the chain of command shifts under the pressure of the crisis. With the president held hostage and the vice president also trapped, Speaker Alan Trumbull steps forward and assumes the role of acting president of the United States. Meanwhile, deep inside the captured White House, Mike reaches the Oval Office. From there, he manages to establish contact with Director Jacobs, giving the officials their first real hope that someone is still alive inside the building and fighting back. At the Pentagon, not everyone is ready to put complete faith in Mike. Some officials question whether one man trapped inside the White House can really make a difference, especially after the building has already been compromised so badly. But Director Jacobs has no doubt. She speaks up for him, making it clear that Mike Banning is loyal, capable, and probably the best chance they have left. While this discussion is happening, Mike's situation inside the White House becomes even more dangerous. An attacker suddenly confronts him, and this one is not easy to take down. The fight is rough, close, and intense, with both men throwing everything they have at each other. For a moment, the intruder actually seems like one of the strongest opponents Mike has faced so far. But Mike uses his surroundings to his advantage, and with the help of a Lincoln statue, he finally overpowers the man and kills him. Soon after, Kang contacts the Pentagon again and lays out his demands. He wants the U.S. 7th Fleet pulled back, and he also demands that all 28,500 American troops stationed near the demilitarized zone be withdrawn. If America refuses, President Asher will be executed. The room falls into heavy silence. The officials are trapped in an impossible position. If they give in, they risk destabilizing the Korean peninsula. If they refuse, the president may die on camera. Acting President Trumbull tries to keep control of the situation and suggests contacting leaders and officials in North Korea, Russia, China, Britain, and France, hoping that some kind of diplomatic route can prevent the crisis from becoming even worse. Inside the bunker, Kang increases the pressure. He pulls out a knife and turns his attention to Admiral Honig, demanding one of the Cerberus codes. Honig tries to resist, but the threat becomes unbearable. President Asher is forced to watch helplessly, distressed by what is happening in front of him. Eventually, Honig gives up the code. Kang wastes no time entering it. At the Pentagon, alarms immediately begin going off. NORAD confirms that one of the Cerberus codes has just been activated from inside the White House bunker. The news sends a fresh wave of fear through the command center. Meanwhile, Mike sends the Pentagon a photo of a tattoo from one of the dead attackers, hoping it can help identify who they are dealing with. Trumbull updates Mike on the seriousness of the situation and explains what Cerberus really means. The system is tied to America's nuclear security, and if all the necessary codes are activated, the consequences could be catastrophic. The only person who can change or stop the process from the bunker's computer is the president himself. That is when they realize why Kang wants Connor. Connor is not just a loose end, he is leverage. If Kang gets his hands on the boy, he can use him to force President Asher into doing whatever he wants. Trumbull gives Mike a direct order: find Connor before the terrorists do and keep him alive. Kang, watching Mike's movements through security footage, realizes this lone agent is becoming a serious problem. He questions Forbes about Mike and quickly decides that Banning has to be eliminated before he ruins the entire operation. Kang's men begin sweeping through the living quarters of the White House, searching for the intruder, but Mike reaches Connor first. He finds the boy hidden inside the secret walls of Lincoln's bedroom, exactly where someone close to the family would know to look. Connor is terrified, but he stays quiet and follows Mike's instructions. Just as Mike pulls him out, more terrorists enter the room and start firing into the walls, trying to flush him out. Mike moves fast, keeping Connor low and out of sight. The boy is scared for his father, but Mike calmly reassures him that President Asher is still alive and that they are going to get through this. Mike contacts the Pentagon and tells them he is sending Connor up through a ventilation shaft. The military prepares a rescue team outside, ready to receive the boy once he reaches the exit point. When one of Kang's men discovers the opening, Mike takes him down before he can alert the others. With a sniper guiding their movement from a distance, two soldiers carefully approach the shaft. They reach Connor and successfully get him out of the White House. The rescue gives everyone at the Pentagon a brief moment of relief. Trumbull personally praises Mike for saving the president's son, but Mike does not have time to enjoy the victory. He still needs answers. To gather more information, Mike ambushes two terrorists and begins questioning them. At first, they laugh at him and refuse to cooperate, acting as if he has no power over them. That attitude disappears quickly when Mike applies pressure and forces them to talk. From them, he finally learns more about the man behind the attack. Mike reports back to Jacobs with the name Kang Yonsek, also known as Janjik Kang, the leader of the paramilitary group KUF. He is one of the most wanted terrorists in the world, but until now, authorities did not even have a clear photo of him. As they dig deeper, they uncover a personal motive as well. Kang's mother was killed by an American landmine, a tragedy that shaped his hatred and fueled his revenge against the United States. Inside the White House, Mike notices another disturbing detail. Explosives have been placed along the walls, but their exact purpose is not yet clear. Whatever Kang is planning, it clearly goes far beyond holding the president hostage. Then Kang speaks to Mike over the intercom. The exchange is tense and personal. Mike tells Kang that Connor is already safe, making it clear that one of Kang's biggest bargaining chips is gone. He also promises that he is coming for him. Kang tries to answer with psychological warfare, bringing up Mike's wife in an attempt to shake him emotionally. Mike does not give him the reaction he wants. In the bunker, President Asher listens to the conversation, the pressure of the situation written all over his face. He now knows Mike is still alive, still fighting, and still somewhere inside the building. Kang refuses to slow down. With Connor out of reach, he turns to Secretary of Defense McMillan and demands another Cerberus code. McMillan resists as long as she can. Even under brutal pressure and Kang's cold cruelty, she refuses to give him what he wants. But when her life is on the line, President Asher cannot bear to watch her die. Desperate to keep her alive, he orders her to reveal the code. McMillan finally gives it up, and Kang activates the second Cerberus code. At the Pentagon, the alarm system erupts again. The crisis has now moved even closer to disaster. Back inside the White House, Mike comes face to face with Dave Forbes. At first, Forbes pretends to be frightened and helpless, playing the role of a surviving agent who barely escaped the chaos. For a brief moment, Mike seems willing to believe him, but then Forbes slips. He mentions Kang by name, even though he should not know who the terrorist leader is. That single mistake tells Mike everything. The room immediately turns hostile. Mike realizes Forbes has been working with the enemy, and the confrontation explodes into a violent fight. Knives slash through the air, fists land hard, and both men fight with the skill of trained agents. Forbes is dangerous, but Mike is sharper, angrier, and more determined. Eventually, Mike gains the upper hand. He disarms Forbes and leaves him badly wounded. Cornered and dying, Forbes finally admits the truth. He betrayed his country because he had lost his way, lost his purpose, and allowed himself to become part of Kang's plan. Mike uses him one last time. He forces Forbes to contact Kang and convince him that Mike Banning is dead. Forbes delivers the lie, and Kang believes it, at least for the moment. Once the message is sent, Mike ends Forbes' betrayal permanently. At the Pentagon, Trumbull tells Mike they cannot wait any longer. The window is closing, and they are sending in the SEALs. Multiple military units begin flying toward Washington, preparing to retake the White House by force. But Kang's hacker spots the incoming operation almost immediately. Inside the White House, Mike discovers empty weapons crates and realizes what the terrorists have acquired. He contacts General Clegg and warns him that Kang's men have Hydra 6, an advanced next-generation weapons system. It is not something the incoming troops are prepared to face. Despite Mike's warning, General Clegg orders the mission to continue. Mike pushes toward the weapons controls and manages to kill 3 enemies stationed there, but he is pinned down before he can disable the system completely. He fights to reach it, knowing what is about to happen, but he cannot get there in time. And tragically, the SEAL team flies straight into the trap. The Hydra 6 system roars to life, and almost instantly, the rescue mission turns into a disaster. One of the helicopters is torn out of the sky, spiraling down under the force of the weapon's brutal rapid fire. The system moves with frightening speed, tracking the incoming teams and destroying them one after another before they even have a real chance to respond. Mike fights his way through the chaos and kills the last terrorist operating near the weapon. Then he grabs an RPG and rushes toward the rooftop, knowing this is his only chance to stop the killing. As the Hydra 6 locks onto the final helicopter, Mike fires. The rocket strikes the weapon and destroys it, but not before the last chopper is hit. The aircraft crashes violently into the White House, triggering a massive explosion that tears through the building and leaves heavy damage behind. Inside the bunker, Kang contacts the Pentagon again and raises the stakes even further. To prove he still has control, he attacks Vice President Rodriguez in front of them. Then he gives his next demand. The 7th Fleet must be recalled, and a helicopter must be prepared for his escape by dawn. Trumbull reconnects with Mike and tells him the situation has reached a breaking point. He is preparing to pull back the 7th Fleet. Mike immediately warns him that doing so would be a serious mistake. Trumbull knows the risk, but he is also trying to keep the president alive, so he gives Mike 30 minutes before he makes the order official. With time running out, Mike takes a brief moment to speak with his wife, Leigh. The conversation is short, but it gives him the push he needs. After everything he has survived, hearing her voice reminds him what he is fighting for and gives him the strength to keep moving. Then Mike makes a bold move. He calls Kang directly and tells him that if he is smart, he should save the last bullet for himself. Mike warns him that the time for bargaining is over. From this point on, there will be no more deals, no more threats, and no more negotiations. Only death. Kang responds by changing tactics. He pulls Secretary McMillan out of the bunker and drags her outside with his men. Once they reach open ground, Kang tells her she is free, but the situation is clearly a trap. News cameras covering the crisis capture McMillan slowly stepping into view, unsure if she is about to be saved or executed. Her back is turned and Kang nearly fires at her from behind. Before he can kill her, Mike opens fire, forcing Kang and his men to react. The distraction gives McMillan just enough time to escape. Troops move in and pull her to safety, while Mike takes down the remaining 3 enemies who stayed behind to fight him. One by one, Mike eliminates them. At the Pentagon, Trumbull tells Mike that he gave it everything he had, but their time is up. He orders the withdrawal of American troops from Korea and recalls the 7th Fleet. The announcement spreads instantly across the media, and Kang watches the news with a satisfied smile, believing he has forced America to bend. But his plan is not finished. Back inside the bunker, Kang covers the hostages' heads with concealed bags, making it impossible to tell who is who. He and his men disguise themselves among the captives, then chain everyone together to create confusion. The group leaves the bunker and moves toward the waiting helicopter. As the chopper lands, soldiers outside aim their weapons but hesitate. With the hostages mixed together and the president possibly among them, they cannot risk opening fire. Kang's group boards the helicopter, and for a moment it looks like they are going to escape. Then, as the helicopter rises into the air, it suddenly explodes. The fireball lights up the sky before the wreckage crashes back to the ground. At the Pentagon, everyone is stunned. They believe President Asher has been killed in the blast along with the hostages and terrorists. Mike hears the report, but something does not sit right with him. He knows Kang is too calculating to die in such an obvious escape attempt. To Mike, it feels less like an ending and more like a distraction. And he is right, the helicopter explosion was only a diversion. Kang and a smaller group of his men are still inside the bunker, holding President Asher captive. While everyone outside thinks the crisis has ended in tragedy, Kang finishes breaking into the final layer of the Cerberus system. The system activates. Only then does Kang's true objective become clear. He never simply wanted revenge, escape, or political pressure. His real plan is to use Cerberus to detonate America's nuclear weapons and destroy the United States from within. At the Pentagon, officials receive the horrifying update. A 5-minute countdown has begun before the nuclear detonation sequence is triggered. Panic fills the room as they realize the entire country is now minutes away from catastrophe. Kang blasts a hole into the tunnels beneath the White House and prepares to escape through the underground passage with Asher. But Mike is already waiting. The moment Kang's men move into the tunnel, Mike opens fire. He kills 3 enemies in quick succession, cutting down Kang's remaining protection. Asher tries to fight back as well, struggling to stop Kang himself, but Kang shoots him, leaving the president wounded. Then the final battle begins. Kang pulls out 2 knives and charges at Mike. The fight is vicious, fast, and brutal. Kang is not an ordinary opponent. He is strong, skilled, and ruthless, and for a while he dominates the fight. He slams Mike around the tunnel, beating him down and mocking him, calling him a failure to break him mentally as much as physically. But Mike refuses to stay down. He absorbs the punishment, waits for an opening, and finally strikes back with a furious combination of blows. Kang loses control for a moment, and Mike seizes the chance. He grabs a knife from the ground and ends the fight, killing Kang once and for all. With Kang dead, Mike rushes back into the bunker and contacts the Pentagon. He tells them President Asher is alive, but there is almost no time left. Less than a minute remains before Cerberus completes the detonation sequence. Jacobs, Trumbull, and General Clegg scramble to guide Mike through the shutdown process. They give him the deactivation code as the countdown races toward 0. Every second matters. Mike enters the code with only moments left. The sequence stops. Cerberus is shut down. The nuclear weapons do not detonate. America has been saved. After the crisis ends, Mike helps President Asher out of the damaged White House. Outside, Asher is finally reunited with Connor, while Lee rushes to Mike, relieved to see him alive. After everything he has endured, Mike is no longer just the man haunted by the tragedy at Camp David. He has finally found the redemption he was searching for. Later, President Asher addresses the nation. He honors everyone who lost their lives during the attack and speaks to a country shaken by fear, grief, and anger. But instead of letting the tragedy define them, he tells the people that their courage, hope, and unity will help them rise above it. As the speech ends, Asher steps away from the podium and approaches Mike. He shakes his hand with respect and gratitude. Mike stands tall, proud, and at peace, knowing that this time, when everything was on the line, he did not fail. So right away, Olympus Has Fallen is not what I'd call a great movie. Not really. It has too many silly moments, too many logic gaps, and a few scenes where you can almost feel the script forcing things to happen, just so the next explosion can arrive on time. But here's the weird thing, it still works. Not completely. Not elegantly, but as a loud, bruising, old-school action thriller, it does enough to keep you watching. And honestly, that's probably the best way to approach it. This is not the kind of film you watch because you want layered political drama or some deeply realistic take on national security. You watch it because Gerard Butler is trapped inside the White House. The place has been taken over, everyone outside is panicking, and now he has to punch, shoot, stab, and crawl his way through the problem one bad guy at a time. And on that level, the movie knows how to deliver. It's messy, yes. It's over the top, absolutely. Sometimes it is so serious about its own ridiculousness that you almost want the film to relax a little. But at the same time, there is a certain rough charm to how direct it is. It does not waste much time pretending to be subtle. It sets up the emotional damage, throws the country into chaos, locks the president in danger, and then basically says, "All right, now watch this guy go to work." That simplicity is part of the appeal. A lot of the criticism against the movie is fair. The story is not especially original. The dialogue can be cheesy. Some of the characters feel more like job titles than actual people. And if you stop to question the plot for more than 5 seconds, the whole thing starts wobbling. But somehow, even with all of that, Olympus Has Fallen has a pulse. It has energy. It has that blunt, aggressive action movie confidence where the film may not be smart, but it is rarely boring. And I think that's why people still come back to it. It is not polished in the way a truly great thriller would be. It is not balanced either. The movie is big, loud, violent, and sometimes kind of exhausting. But there are also moments where that exact approach becomes the reason it is fun. It feels like a throwback to a time when action movies did not always need to be clever or self-aware. Sometimes they just needed a tough hero, a dangerous building, a pile of villains, and enough momentum to keep the audience from checking the time. That is where Olympus Has Fallen finds its lane. It is flawed action cinema, no doubt, but it is also entertaining action cinema, and depending on what you want from it, that may be enough. Looking at Olympus Has Fallen now, it's kind of funny how this became the start of a whole franchise. At the time, it really felt like one of those one-and-done action movies. You know, the kind of film that comes in, blows everything up for 2 hours, gives the hero his redemption, and then walks away. But somehow, Mike Banning kept coming back. And honestly, out of the whole series, this first movie still feels like the one with the clearest identity. It is rough, it is loud, and it is definitely not perfect, but it has a directness that the later films did not always manage to capture. Olympus Has Fallen has a very simple engine. The White House is taken, the president is in danger, and Banning is the only guy inside who can do anything about it. That's it. No need to overcomplicate the thing. That simplicity gives the movie a kind of blunt force that works in its favor. The sequel, London Has Fallen, tries to go bigger, wider, and more chaotic, but bigger does not automatically mean better. In fact, that is where the first film looks stronger by comparison. Olympus at least has a contained setting. There is pressure because the danger is locked inside one iconic place. The White House becomes the battlefield, and even when the logic is shaky, the movie has a focused shape. You always know where the fight is, what the goal is, and why Banning matters. With the later films, especially London Has Fallen, that focus starts to feel thinner. The action may be larger, but it does not always feel more exciting. Sometimes it just feels louder. The first movie is already exaggerated, obviously, but it still has enough grit and tension to make the chaos feel like it has weight. That's probably why Olympus Has Fallen remains the most watchable of the bunch for a lot of people. It is not because it is flawless, far from it. It is because it knows its basic promise and delivers it with enough confidence. Gerard Butler as Mike Banning, trapped in a disaster zone, fighting through terrorists like a human wrecking ball, that idea is at its cleanest here. And maybe that is also why part of me feels this should have stayed as a standalone movie. Not every solid action thriller needs to become a trilogy. Sometimes the first punch lands because it is simple, sudden, and direct. Stretch that same idea too far, and the impact starts to fade. Olympus Has Fallen works best when you treat it as that first punch. Messy, brutal, slightly ridiculous, but strong enough to leave a mark. The basic idea of Olympus Has Fallen is honestly one of those concepts that sells itself before the movie even begins. The White House gets taken over. The president is trapped inside. The people in charge are stuck outside, watching everything fall apart. And somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, there is one man who knows the building, knows the security, and knows how to fight. That is a very clean action movie setup. It does not need 10 different layers. It does not need a complicated political maze. The hook is right there. Take one of the most protected buildings in the world, turn it into a war zone, and then drop a disgraced Secret Service agent into the middle of it. From that point on, the movie is basically running on pressure. And to be fair, that pressure is what keeps the film alive. The siege gives the story an immediate sense of danger, even when the logic behind it is questionable. You are not watching because every detail makes perfect sense. You are watching because the situation is simple enough to understand instantly. The president is in danger. The terrorists are inside. The clock is moving. Banning has to get through the building before everything gets worse. That kind of setup is old-fashioned, but it is also effective. There is something naturally intense about turning a familiar symbol into a closed battlefield. The hallways, the bunker, the security rooms, the damaged rooms inside the White House, all of it gives the movie a contained shape. Banning is not running across the whole world trying to stop some vague threat. He is inside one building, moving from one problem to the next, clearing the place piece by piece. And that is where the movie is at its strongest. The story is not subtle, and it is definitely not believable in every moment. Actually, sometimes it is wildly unbelievable, but the core structure works because it understands what the audience wants from this type of thriller. We want the impossible situation. We want the hero trapped behind enemy lines. We want the command center full of worried officials. We want the villain holding the president hostage while the one guy nobody is counting on starts changing the game from the inside. It is familiar, sure, very familiar. But familiar does not always mean ineffective. Sometimes a movie can survive on a strong premise if it keeps the momentum going and gives the audience enough reasons to stay locked in. Olympus Has Fallen does that by keeping its story direct. The White House falls, the system fails, and Mike Banning becomes the last line of defense. Simple, ridiculous, but hard to look away from. Mike Banning's whole arc starts with failure, which is probably the smartest thing the movie does for him. Before the White House attack, before the one-man army stuff, before he starts dropping terrorists in hallways, the film gives him a wound. He is not just some perfect action hero waiting for the plot to need him. He is a man who made the only choice he could make in a terrible moment and still ended up carrying the guilt for what happened. That opening tragedy matters because it pushes Banning out of the life he clearly belongs in. He saves the president, but he cannot save the first lady. And even though the situation is almost impossible, the damage is already done. He is moved away from the presidential detail and buried in a desk job, which feels like punishment even if nobody says it that directly. For a guy like Banning, sitting behind paperwork is not just boring, it is exile. You can feel that he is still close to the world he lost, but no longer part of it. That is what gives the later attack a little more weight. When the White House is taken, Banning is not only trying to save the president. He is being pulled back into the place where he failed, back toward the people he could not fully protect, back into the role he was removed from. It is not subtle, but it works. Action movies do not always need emotional complexity, as long as the emotional engine is clear. And here, it is very clear. Banning wants to fix what cannot really be fixed. He cannot undo the accident. He cannot bring the First Lady back, but he can prove that he is still the man they needed him to be. He can protect the president. He can save the son. He can walk back into the disaster and do the job that everyone else is suddenly too far away or too helpless to do. That gives his violence a personal charge. Without that backstory, Banning would just be another tough guy moving through rooms and taking people out. With it, there is at least some sense of unfinished business behind him. He is not fighting because he wants glory. He is fighting because this is the one thing he still knows how to do, and maybe the only way he can live with himself is by not failing again. Is it a deep redemption arc? Not exactly. But it is clean, direct, and useful. It gives Gerard Butler something to play beyond the physical action. The clenched jaw, the quiet guilt, the way Banning seems uncomfortable being on the outside of the president's world, all of that helps. He feels like a man who has been waiting, whether he admits it or not, for one more chance to matter. And when that chance finally arrives, the movie does not waste it. The easiest way to describe Olympus Has Fallen is also the one everybody uses. It is basically Die Hard in the White House. And honestly, that comparison is not wrong. You have the lockdown location. You have the terrorists taking control. You have the important hostages. You have officials outside trying to manage the crisis from a room full of screens and serious faces. And then you have one guy inside the building, separated from the system, slowly becoming the biggest problem the villains did not plan for. That is the formula. The movie knows it. We know it. Everyone knows it. But I do think there is a reason that formula keeps coming back. When it works, it is incredibly satisfying. There is something very easy to enjoy about watching a single hero move through enemy territory while the people in power realize, little by little, that this one man is doing more damage than an entire response team. It is simple, but it hits that classic action movie nerve. The thing with Olympus Has Fallen is that it does not really try to hide its influences. You can feel Die Hard all over it. You can feel a bit of Air Force One too, especially with the president as hostage angle and the national crisis unfolding around him. There are shades of older hostage thrillers, military action movies, even that television-style ticking clock energy where every few minutes another problem appears and the stakes get pushed higher. So no, this is not a wildly original movie. But I also do not think originality is the main reason people watch something like this. The real question is whether the borrowed formula still has enough force behind it. And for a decent stretch of the movie, it does. Banning is not John McClane, and the film is not as sharp or clever as Die Hard. It does not have that same perfect mix of tension, humor, character, and escalation. Die Hard feels like a machine where every piece clicks into place. Olympus Has Fallen is more like a battering ram, less elegant, more blunt, but that bluntness is part of its personality. Where Die Hard has wit, Olympus has aggression. Where Air Force One has that presidential thriller flavor, Olympus is more brutal and messy. It takes pieces from better movies, sure, but then it runs them through a much louder, bloodier, more serious action filter. Sometimes that makes it feel exciting. Sometimes it makes it feel a little ridiculous. Sometimes both things are happening in the same scene, and maybe that is why the comparison is useful, but also a little limiting. Calling it Die Hard in the White House tells you what kind of movie it is, but it does not fully explain the tone. This is not a clever underdog action film with a smirk. It is a grim, flag-waving siege movie where the hero does not just outsmart the terrorists, he crushes through them. The movie borrows the structure, but the attitude is different. So yes, the formula is familiar, very familiar. But in this case, familiar does not automatically mean boring. Olympus Has Fallen takes one of the oldest action setups in the book and gives it a bigger, louder, more politically charged stage. It may not reinvent anything, but it understands the pleasure of the setup. Trap the hero, raise the stakes, cut off the help, and let the audience watch the bad guys slowly realize they picked the wrong building on the wrong day. The comparison with White House Down is impossible to avoid, mostly because Hollywood did that strange thing where two movies with almost the same basic idea arrived around the same time. One film says, "What if terrorists attacked the White House?" And then the other film says pretty much the same thing, but the difference is in the attitude. White House Down knows it is ridiculous. It has that lighter, sillier energy where the movie almost winks at you and says, "Yes, this is dumb, but come on, just go with it." Olympus Has Fallen does not really do that. This one walks into the room with a straight face, clenched jaw, and blood on its shirt. And depending on your mood, that can either make it better or make it more frustrating. For me, the seriousness is what gives Olympus Has Fallen its stronger punch, even when the story makes no sense. It feels heavier. The violence hits harder. The White House attack feels less like a theme park disaster ride and more like a nasty siege. There is no constant comic relief softening the edges, no big playful tone trying to make everything feel harmless. When people get shot here, the movie wants you to feel the impact. That is why some viewers prefer it. It has better acting weight too. Gerard Butler brings that bruised, angry action hero energy. Morgan Freeman gives the command room scene some authority even when the material is thin. Angela Bassett adds dignity. Aaron Eckhart, depending on how generous you are feeling, at least feels like he belongs in the serious version of this story. The cast helps sell a movie that on paper is honestly just as absurd as White House Down. But that is also the problem, because White House Down being silly means its flaws are easier to forgive. You are not really expected to believe every security failure or every wild plot turn. The movie is already playing in a comic book disaster zone. Olympus Has Fallen, on the other hand, asks you to take the chaos seriously, so when something ridiculous happens, it stands out more. The tone makes the nonsense louder. That is the strange trade-off between the two movies. White House Down is softer, goofier, and more self-aware. Olympus Has Fallen is harder, bloodier, and more committed. One wants to entertain you with a grin. The other wants to grab you by the collar and drag you through broken glass. Neither version is exactly realistic, but they are unrealistic in completely different flavors. And honestly, I understand why people split on them. If you want the lighter version of this premise, White House Down probably goes down easier. If you want the more brutal version, the one with less joking and more bodies hitting the floor, Olympus Has Fallen is the stronger choice. It may be more absurd than it seems to realize, but it also has more bite. That bite is what gives it the edge. This is where Olympus Has Fallen becomes a little strange, because the movie is clearly built like pure popcorn entertainment, but it does not always behave like it knows that. The plot is ridiculous. Let's just be honest about that. A heavily armed terrorist force somehow launches this massive attack on the White House, gets inside, overwhelms almost everyone, and suddenly the entire fate of the country depends on one disgraced Secret Service agent who happens to be nearby. That is not exactly grounded political realism, and that would be fine, honestly. Action movies are allowed to be absurd. Some of the best ones are. The problem is not that Olympus Has Fallen is unbelievable. The problem is that it often acts like it is deadly serious, even when the story is doing something completely insane. The music swells, the officials stare at screens with grave faces, everyone speaks like history is being written in real time, and meanwhile Gerard Butler is crawling around the White House taking out terrorists like he is clearing levels in a very angry video game. There is a funny tension there. Part of me respects the commitment. The movie does not undercut itself every 2 minutes with jokes. It does not turn the danger into a cartoon. It wants the attack to feel frightening, and at times, especially during the early siege, that seriousness gives the film some real weight. The violence feels harsher because nobody is laughing it off. The stakes feel bigger because the movie refuses to treat the White House as just another action playground. But then the logic starts collapsing. You begin asking questions the movie really does not want you to ask. How did the attackers pull this off so easily? Why is the security response so helpless? Why do certain decisions feel like they exist only to stretch the plot into the next scene? Why does everyone outside the building seem less useful than the one guy inside with a handgun and a bad mood? And once those questions start, the serious tone makes them harder to ignore. If the movie had been more playful, maybe the nonsense would slide by more easily. You would just accept it as part of the ride. But because Olympus Has Fallen keeps insisting on this grim, dramatic atmosphere, every absurd beat feels bigger. The film wants to be intense, but sometimes it becomes intense about things that are just plain silly. Still, that seriousness is also part of why the movie is memorable. It gives the film a certain blunt personality. It is not cool and ironic. It is not winking at the audience. It is standing there with a straight face, covered in smoke, fully convinced that this is the most important thing happening in the world. And even when that is ridiculous, there is something entertaining about a movie committing that hard. So the tone is both the film's strength and its weakness. When it works, Olympus Has Fallen feels brutal, urgent, and high stakes. When it does not, it feels like a very dumb story wearing a very serious suit. But that mix is also what defines the movie. It is absurd popcorn logic delivered with the confidence of a national tragedy, and whether that bothers you or entertains you probably decides your whole reaction to the film. Gerard Butler is the main reason Olympus Has Fallen works as well as it does. The movie around him is not always smart. It is not always believable. Sometimes it is barely even trying to make sense. But Butler gives the whole thing a center. He plays Mike Banning like a man who has been waiting for permission to stop pretending he belongs behind a desk. The second the attack begins, you can almost feel the movie relax, because now it has finally put him where he needs to be. Inside the chaos, Butler has that old-school action star quality where he does not need to over-explain the character. He looks tired, angry, guilty, and completely ready to ruin someone's day. That is enough. You believe that this guy knows the building. You believe he has trained for impossible situations. And most importantly, you believe he would keep going even after any normal person would have collapsed in a hallway somewhere. That matters in a movie this ridiculous, because when the plot is asking you to accept one man fighting through an army of terrorists inside the White House, the actor has to sell the physicality. Butler does. He is not graceful in that polished superhero way. He is rougher than that. He fights like someone who wants the fight to end quickly and painfully. Headshots, close combat, sudden attacks, dirty moves. Banning does not make the action look pretty. He makes it look like work, and that is exactly the right energy for this film. What helps is that Butler does not play him as some smiling action cartoon. Banning has a little banter, sure, and a few lines that are clearly trying to land in that John McClane zone. Not all of them work. Some of the one-liners are honestly a bit stiff, and you can feel Butler pushing through dialogue that is not as sharp as the movie thinks it is. But even when the line is weak, he still has enough presence to keep the moment alive. That is not nothing. A lesser lead could have made this whole thing collapse into parody. Butler keeps it grounded enough. Not realistic, exactly, but grounded in the specific way an action movie needs. He gives Banning a kind of blunt sincerity. He is not trying to be cool every second. He is not playing the role with a wink. He treats the mission seriously, and because of that, the audience can buy into the danger even when the screenplay is taking some wild shortcuts. There's also something satisfying about seeing him in this kind of role. He fits the movie's mood. The film is loud, violent, stubborn, and a little bit ridiculous, and Butler matches that perfectly. He is not too clean for it. He looks like he belongs in the smoke and broken glass. When he moves through the White House, taking out enemies one by one, the movie becomes exactly what it promised to be. A tough guy, a trapped building, too many villains, no backup. And sometimes that is all you need. Mike Banning is not the most layered action hero ever written, but Butler gives him enough grit, guilt, and force to make him memorable. The film may borrow from better movies, but Butler is the part that feels most fully locked in. He carries the nonsense, absorbs the weak dialogue, and still makes the character feel like someone you want to watch fight his way to the end. Without him, Olympus Has Fallen would probably feel much thinner. With him, it has muscle. One of the funny things about Olympus Has Fallen is that the cast is way better than the material probably deserves. You look at the names in this movie, and it feels like the film is trying to convince you it is more important than it actually is. Morgan Freeman, Angela Bassett, Aaron Eckhart, Melissa Leo, Robert Forster, Dylan McDermott, Ashley Judd, Rhoda Mitchell. These are not random background faces. These are actors who can bring weight to a scene just by standing there and looking concerned. And honestly, sometimes that is exactly what the movie asks them to do. Morgan Freeman, for example, is basically brought in to give the crisis room scenes authority. He does not have the flashiest role, and the script does not give him anything especially surprising, but he still has that presence. When he speaks, the room feels calmer, more serious. Even if the dialogue is just standard government emergency talk, Freeman makes it sound like something worth listening to. Angela Bassett is similar. She brings dignity and sharpness to a role that could have easily been forgettable. The movie does not give her a huge emotional arc or anything that deep, but she makes the character feel competent, focused. Like someone who understands the scale of what is happening, even when the script is busy cutting back to explosions. Aaron Eckhart is a little more complicated. Some people may find his president too stiff or too unlucky, and there are moments where he mostly has to sit there looking pained and noble. But there is also a version of the movie where that works. He has the right serious face for this kind of role. He looks like a president from an action thriller, tough, decent, trapped in an impossible situation, trying to keep his dignity while everything around him collapses. Melissa Leo probably gets the most intense material out of the supporting cast. Her scenes are loud, painful, and very dramatic, maybe even too dramatic depending on your tolerance for this movie's tone, but she commits to them. She gives the Secretary of Defense a stubbornness that fits the film's patriotic, clenched fist style. Even when the scene itself feels exaggerated, she plays it like it matters. Then you have Dylan McDermott, Robert Forster, Ashley Judd, and the rest of the ensemble, all moving through roles that feel useful to the plot but not always fully shaped as people. And that is the bigger issue with the cast. The actors are not really the problem, the writing is. Most of these characters are thin, they have titles more than personalities: president, general, speaker, director, wife, traitor, villain, secretary. They exist to push the crisis forward, to raise the stakes, to look worried in command rooms, or to give Banning something personal to fight for. The movie rarely slows down long enough to let them become more than that. But because the cast is strong, it covers some of the weakness. A lesser group of actors would have made the film feel cheaper and emptier. Here, even when the characters are underwritten, the performers give the scenes a little extra weight. Freeman makes the room feel official. Bassett makes it feel urgent. Eckhart makes the hostage situation feel more personal. Leo brings resistance. Judd gives the opening tragedy emotional shape, even with limited screen time. So the supporting cast becomes one of those strange strengths where the movie benefits from talent it does not fully use. You can feel these actors doing a lot of quiet repair work. They are taking basic lines, simple reactions, familiar roles, and trying to make them feel bigger than they are on the page. Sometimes they succeed. Sometimes the writing is just too thin. But their presence helps the movie feel like a real theatrical action thriller instead of a cheap knockoff with a bigger explosion budget. That might sound like faint praise, but it matters. Because in a film this loud, this violent, and this dependent on momentum, the supporting cast gives the chaos a little structure. They may not be given enough depth, but they give the movie faces we recognize, voices we trust, and enough dramatic weight to make the crisis feel larger than one man running through hallways with a gun. The villain's side of Olympus Has Fallen is one of those areas where the movie is effective in the moment, even if it starts to feel pretty thin once you step back from it. Kang, played by Rick Yoon, is not exactly a complicated villain. He is cold, violent, focused, and basically designed to be hated from the second he reveals what he is really doing. And for this kind of movie, that is mostly the point. The film is not trying to give us a layered antagonist with a deeply explored worldview. It wants a ruthless enemy who can take over the White House, threaten the president, and give Mike Banning someone worth destroying. On that level, Kang does the job. Rick Yoon gives him a sharp, icy presence. He does not waste much energy. He does not need to shout every line to seem dangerous. There is something controlled about him, and that makes the cruelty land a little harder. When he starts making demands, when he reveals how prepared he is, when he shows how little hesitation he has about hurting people, the movie gives him enough menace to keep the situation tense. But the character himself is still pretty sketchy. That is the problem. Kang is more function than person. He is the mastermind because the plot needs a mastermind. He has the plan, the men, the weapons, the timing, the access, and the confidence to walk straight into one of the most secure places in the world. But the film does not really pause to make that feel believable. It just says, here he is, he planned everything, and expects us to move along. And honestly, most of the time, the movie moves fast enough that you do. The infiltration angle is actually a strong idea on paper. The terrorists hiding inside a diplomatic visit, slipping into the president's inner circle, using the chaos outside to take control from within, that is a solid thriller setup. It gives the attack a little more shape than just people with guns storming the building. There is betrayal involved. There is planning. There is that uncomfortable feeling that the danger was already inside before anyone realized it. The double agent element adds to that. Having someone from the president's own side working with the attackers gives the story another layer of threat. It is not just about an outside enemy. It is also about trust breaking down from the inside. In a better script, that betrayal could have had more emotional weight. It could have been sharper, nastier, maybe even a little tragic. Here, it mostly works as a plot device, but it still gives Banning another problem to deal with, and that is really how the villain plot functions. It is there to keep tightening the screws. Kang takes the bunker. The president is trapped. The officials outside are pressured. The body count rises. Demands are made. Codes become part of the game. Every few minutes, the villains do something else to remind everyone that they are in control. At least until Banning starts taking that control away room by room. The weakness is that most of the terrorists around Kang are completely interchangeable. They are targets more than characters. They exist to be taken out in hallways, stairwells, and dark rooms. That is normal for this type of action movie, but it also limits the tension. Once you realize Banning is basically cutting through them one by one, the threat becomes less about who these people are and more about how many of them are left. Still, the movie understands one important thing. The villains need to feel ugly enough that the audience enjoys watching them fall, and Olympus Has Fallen does not soften them. Kang and his people are brutal, cruel, and direct. They hurt civilians, they execute security personnel, they beat hostages, they turn the White House into enemy territory. It is all broad, yes, and sometimes very one-dimensional, but it gives the action a clear moral charge. You are never confused about who you want Banning to stop, so as villains they are not especially deep, but they are useful. They are nasty enough to create anger, organized enough to create stakes, and extreme enough to justify the movie's harsh, bloody response. Kang may not stand beside the great action movie villains, and he is definitely not the next Hans Gruber, but he gives the film a cold center of danger. For a movie this blunt, that is probably all it was ever asking from him. The action in Olympus Has Fallen is not gentle, at all. This is not one of those clean, bloodless action movies where people get shot, fall neatly out of frame, and the hero walks away without the scene feeling too ugly. This movie wants the violence to have impact, sometimes maybe too much impact, but that harshness is also a big part of why it stands out. Once the attack begins, the film basically stops pretending it is going to be polite. People are shot down in the open, security teams get wiped out, bodies hit the floor fast. The fights are close, dirty, and brutal. Banning does not move through the White House like a superhero doing choreography for the camera. He moves like someone trying to survive and end every fight as quickly as possible. There is no elegance to most of it, and that actually works. The hand-to-hand scenes have this rough, nasty energy. A lot of action movies try to make combat look cool first and painful second. Here, it feels the other way around. The punches, headlocks, knife attacks, and sudden kills are designed to feel efficient. Banning is not trying to impress anyone. He is trying to clear the next room before the next guy kills him, and that makes the action feel meaner. The shootouts have the same quality: loud, fast, messy, and often excessive. The body count gets ridiculous after a while, but the movie commits so hard to that R-rated brutality that you kind of accept it as part of the world. This is a film where subtlety has already been thrown out of a window. So when the bullets start flying, it does not hold back. That is probably why some people enjoy it so much. There is a throwback quality here, almost like the movie is trying to return to an era when action thrillers were allowed to be rougher around the edges. It is not interested in softening the violence for a wider audience. It wants the bad guys to feel vile, and it wants their defeat to feel satisfying. That is a very old-school action instinct, and honestly, when the movie is working, it scratches that itch pretty well. But the violence can also become exhausting. Because the film is so relentless, there are moments where the action starts to blur together. Another hallway, another terrorist, another body, another explosion. The movie does not always give enough breathing room between the chaos, so instead of tension building naturally, it sometimes just keeps hammering the same note. Loud, brutal, serious, again and again. Still, when the action lands, it lands. The best scenes have a sharpness to them. Banning sneaking through the building, using his knowledge of the White House, catching enemies off guard, turning their own confidence against them. That is where the violence feels most satisfying. It is not just noise then. It becomes part of the cat and mouse rhythm. The terrorists may control the building, but Banning knows the building. and that advantage gives the action a little strategy beneath the bloodshed. The movie also has no problem showing pain on the hostage side. The beatings, the threats, the torture, the fear in the bunker, all of that gives the violence a nastier emotional edge. Whether that works for you depends on your tolerance. Some viewers will find it intense and gripping. Others may find it too much, especially because the film is not playful enough to create distance from the brutality. But that is the identity of Olympus Has Fallen. It is a hard-R siege movie wearing a patriotic action thriller jacket. It is aggressive, blunt, and often graphic. It does not always know when to pull back, but it does know how to make the action feel physical. You feel the impact. You feel the danger. You feel the movie trying to hit harder than the safer blockbusters around it. And even when it goes overboard, there is something admirable about how fully it commits. This is not polished action. It is bruising action. It is smoke, blood, broken glass, and Gerard Butler dragging the movie forward one violent encounter at a time. If that is what you came for, Olympus Has Fallen gives you plenty of it. The White House assault is the scene that really defines Olympus Has Fallen. Before that, the movie is setting the pieces on the board. Banning's guilt, the president's family tragedy, the desk job, the official meetings, all the usual thriller setup. But once the attack starts, the film suddenly becomes exactly what it was sold as. Big, violent, chaotic, and honestly kind of shocking in how far it pushes the destruction. It is not a small sequence. The attack comes from the air, from the ground, from inside the system, and the movie throws all of it at you with almost no pause. Planes, gunfire, explosions, civilians running, security teams getting overwhelmed, the White House perimeter collapsing piece by piece. It is loud in that almost obnoxious action movie way, but it does have force. You feel the movie trying to make this moment huge, and in fairness, it mostly succeeds. There is something disturbing about watching such a familiar symbol get torn apart on screen. Even if you are not American, the White House is one of those buildings everybody recognizes. It carries weight before the movie even does anything with it. So when the attack begins and the building is suddenly under siege, the scene has an automatic shock value. It is not just another random base or office tower. It is the White House. That gives the action a strange kind of power. Of course, if you think about the logistics for even a second, the whole sequence starts to look ridiculous. The security response feels wildly underprepared. The attackers seem almost supernaturally coordinated. People with serious weapons appear exactly where the script needs them. The defense of one of the most protected buildings in the world collapses so quickly that you almost want to pause the movie and ask everyone in charge what their actual job was supposed to be. But while it is happening, the scene has momentum. That is the important part. The sequence moves fast enough that the absurdity does not fully catch up with it right away. It keeps piling on images. The aircraft attack, the streets turning into a battlefield, the security forces falling, the building taking damage, the president being rushed toward the bunker. It is overwhelming by design. The movie wants you to feel like control has been ripped away in minutes, and that loss of control is what gives banning his entrance real energy. Once the White House falls, the entire system looks broken. The officials outside are watching screens. The military response is too late. The people inside are either dead, captured, or trapped. Then Banning pushes his way into the chaos, and the movie shifts from disaster spectacle into survival action. The big set piece is not just there to blow things up. It creates the world where Banning becomes necessary. That is why the attack works better than some of the later action. It has scale. It has urgency. It has that nasty surprise factor. Later, the film can become repetitive with hallway fights and shootouts, but this opening assault has a clear dramatic purpose. It turns the safest place in the country into enemy territory. It shows how badly everyone has underestimated the threat, and it gives the movie its strongest image: the flag, the smoke, the gunfire, and the sense that something impossible is happening right in front of you. Is it believable? Not really. Is it subtle? Absolutely not. But as an action set piece, it gives Olympus Has Fallen the punch it needs. It is the scene people remember, the moment where the film stops warming up and starts swinging. Even if the effects are uneven and the logic is shaky, the attack has enough brutality and scale to leave a mark. After that scene, you understand the movie's personality completely. It is going to be loud. It is going to be serious. It is going to be absurd, and it is going to keep hitting until either you give in to it or check out completely. For a movie that runs close to 2 hours, Olympus Has Fallen moves with a lot more urgency than you might expect. It does not really sit around waiting for the audience to get comfortable. Once the setup is finished and the White House attack begins, the film keeps pushing forward. Sometimes that works beautifully. There is always another room to clear, another hostage situation getting worse, another bad decision happening in the command center, another piece of the terrorist plan being revealed. The movie understands that, for this kind of action thriller, stillness can be dangerous, not the good kind of dangerous, the boring kind, and to its credit, Olympus Has Fallen is rarely boring. Even when the story gets dumb, even when the dialogue starts sounding too stiff, even when the logic is basically hanging by a thread, the movie still has motion. It has that just keep going energy. Banning moves, the villains escalate. The officials panic, the clock keeps tightening. The film does not give you much time to sit there and fully process how absurd some of it is. That is probably why it works better as a casual action watch than as something you pick apart scene by scene. But the pacing is not perfect. There are moments where the movie feels rushed, like it is sprinting past character material because it wants to get back to the next violent beat. Then weirdly, there are also moments where the constant noise starts to slow the movie down in a different way. Not because nothing is happening, but because too much of the same thing is happening. Shootout, serious faces, threat, banning kills someone, cut back to the bunker, repeat. After a while, that rhythm can get a little tiring. That is the risk with a movie this loud. If every scene is trying to be intense, intensity starts losing its shape. You need contrast. You need breathing room. You need a few quieter moments that let the danger settle instead of just stacking more bodies on top of the last scene. Olympus Has Fallen sometimes forgets that. It is so committed to keeping the pressure high that it occasionally turns pressure into repetition. Still, there is a reason the film has rewatch value. It is easy to drop back into. The setup is clean. The goal is obvious. The hero is strong. The villains are hateable. The action starts early enough and keeps coming. You do not need to be in a very specific mood to understand what the movie is offering. It is the kind of film you can put on with friends, food, and half a willingness to ignore reality, and it will do its job. That sounds like a small compliment, but for action movies, it is actually a big one. Some films fall apart on rewatch because once the surprise is gone, there is nothing left. Olympus Has Fallen is not really built on surprise. It is built on momentum. You know where it is going. You know Banning is going to fight his way through. You know the movie is not suddenly going to become subtle or realistic, but the pleasure comes from watching the machine run anyway, and that old-school energy helps. There is a very 90s action feel to the way it moves, not because it is as good as the best films from that era, but because it has the same kind of simple, blunt confidence. It gives you a tough hero, a contained battlefield, a ridiculous threat, and enough violent momentum to carry the whole thing across the finish line. No overthinking, no complicated mythology. Just a man with a mission and a building full of enemies. So yes, the pacing has problems. It can rush, it can repeat itself, it can become exhausting when the movie refuses to lower its voice, but it also keeps the film alive. Olympus Has Fallen may stumble whenever you ask it to be smart, but as a piece of action entertainment, it understands movement. It keeps pushing, keeps hitting, keeps dragging you forward. And sometimes that is exactly why you keep watching. Technically, Olympus Has Fallen is a strange mix of solid craftsmanship and moments that look much cheaper than they probably should. You can feel Anton Fuqua trying to give the movie weight. He does not shoot it like a joke. The action has grit, the rooms feel tense, the violence has impact, and there is a certain seriousness in the way the camera moves through the chaos. Even when the story is ridiculous, Fuqua directs it with enough control that the movie rarely feels completely careless. That is important, because a film like this could have easily looked like bargain bin disaster action. For the most part, it does not. There is a hard, smoky, battered look to the White House once the siege begins. The lighting gets darker, the hallways feel dangerous, and the building slowly turns into this broken battlefield. That atmosphere helps. It makes the movie feel more physical. You are not just watching people run through clean sets with fake danger around them. There is debris, smoke, blood, damage, and that constant sense that the place has been violated. The cinematography does enough to support that mood. It gives the film a rough action thriller texture which fits the tone. This is not a glossy superhero-style version of destruction. It is dirtier than that, more blunt. And when the camera is focused on Banning moving through the building, stalking enemies, checking corners, fighting in tight spaces, the visual style works pretty well. The action is usually clear enough to follow, and that matters more than people admit, because chaotic action is one thing, confusing action is another. Fuqua mostly understands the difference. The movie can be loud and messy, but it usually does not become completely unreadable. You know where Banning is, what he is trying to do, and where the danger is coming from. That gives the fights a practical rhythm. They are not always original, but they have enough force and clarity to stay engaging. The problem is when the movie goes bigger. That is where the visual effects start to show their limits. Some of the CGI is passable, maybe even decent for what the movie is trying to do, but other moments look fake in a way that pulls you right out. Explosions, aircraft, missile attacks, damaged landmarks. Some of it has that rubbery, artificial quality where you stop feeling danger and start noticing the computer work. And once you notice it, it is hard to unsee. There are shots that should feel massive and frightening, but instead look a little cartoonish. Not enough to ruin the entire movie, but enough to weaken the illusion. The film wants the destruction to feel shocking, especially because it is dealing with iconic American imagery, but when the effects do not fully sell it, the emotional punch gets softer. The shaky cam also does not always help. There are places where it adds urgency, sure. A little instability can make an attack feel more immediate, but when it becomes excessive, it starts to feel like the movie is trying to manufacture intensity instead of letting the scene breathe. The best action moments are the ones where the camera trusts the movement, the geography, and Butler's physical presence. The weaker ones are when the image gets too restless for its own good. Still, the overall presentation has enough professionalism to carry the film. The score does what it is supposed to do. It pushes the tension, underlines the patriotic emotion, and gives the crisis scenes that heavy, dramatic pulse. Is it subtle? No, not really. But subtlety is not exactly the language of this movie. The music is there to make everything feel bigger, more urgent, more national, more final. In that sense, it fits. And that really sums up the technical side of Olympus Has Fallen. When the movie is grounded in physical action, dark corridors, tense rooms, and brutal close combat, it looks and feels strong. When it leans too hard on CGI spectacle, the seams start showing. Fuqua's direction gives the film enough tension and momentum to survive its weaker effects, but the visual polish is uneven. Sometimes it feels like a muscular theatrical action thriller. Other times, it briefly slips into something closer to a flashy TV disaster sequence. But even with those flaws, the technical package mostly supports the ride. It is not elegant, it is not always convincing, but it has grit, scale, and enough visual energy to make the siege feel alive. And for a movie built on smoke, gunfire, panic, and one man tearing through the White House, that roughness almost becomes part of the texture. This is probably the part of Olympus Has Fallen that decides whether you can enjoy it or not. The movie is extremely patriotic, extremely serious, and extremely full of nonsense. And I don't mean that as a complete insult. The film is very open about what it is doing. It is flag-waving action cinema. The White House is not just a location here, it is a symbol. The attack is not just an attack, it is meant to feel like an assault on the country itself. Every serious face in the command room, every shot of destruction, every moment where officials talk about impossible choices, all of it is designed to make the situation feel huge. The movie wants you to feel the national panic. That is why the patriotic tone is so heavy. Sometimes it works. There are moments where the scale of the crisis gives the film a real charge, especially when the White House first falls and everyone outside realizes how badly things have gone wrong. The film leans hard into that fear of vulnerability, that idea that even the most protected place can be broken open. But then the logic gaps start piling up, and they pile up fast. The White House security response is almost laughably weak. The terrorists seem to have endless access, perfect timing, impossible weapons, and a plan that only works because everyone else suddenly becomes useless. The military response feels strangely delayed or badly managed. The command room decisions often sound serious, but when you actually think about them, they do not always make much sense. Then there are the code issues, the bunker decisions, the damaged landmarks, the way certain characters survive or fail depending entirely on what the next scene needs. It is one of those movies where if you pause to ask, "Wait, how did that happen?" you may never stop asking questions. So you kind of have to make a deal with the film. Either you accept the madness and enjoy the ride, or the whole thing collapses in your hands, because Olympus Has Fallen is not built for viewers who need tight realism. It is not built for anyone who wants a believable explanation for every military failure or security breach. This is a movie where the system fails so the hero can rise. That is the entire design. And for the right audience, that design works. If you enjoy loud action thrillers, brutal fights, clear villains, high stakes, and a hero who solves problems with a gun and a clenched jaw, this movie gives you exactly that. It does not ask you to decode anything. It does not hide behind complexity. It puts America in danger, traps the president, unleashes Gerard Butler, and lets the machinery run. But if you need subtlety, this is going to be painful. The nationalism can feel overdone. The villains can feel one-dimensional. The emotional beats can feel forced. The ending can feel too clean and too proud of itself. There are moments where the movie almost seems to confuse volume with importance, as if making something louder automatically makes it more meaningful. Still, that is also part of its identity. Olympus Has Fallen is not pretending to be a careful political thriller. Not really. It is a blunt, angry, patriotic siege movie made for people who want old-fashioned action with a modern level of violence. It works best when you stop arguing with it and let it be what it is: ridiculous, intense, messy, and built entirely around the pleasure of watching one man fight back when every official system has failed. That audience will probably have a good time. Everyone else may spend 2 hours wondering how the most secure building in America had the defensive power of an unlocked garage.